Let's Book, der Molden-Podcast.
A very warm welcome to a new episode of our Molden podcast from the Studio Book Publishing Group. My name is Susanne Falk and I'll be your host for this episode. Today, things are a little different. You'll have noticed, of course, that I'm greeting you in English. That's because of our guest. And my dear colleague Matthias Opus isn't with us today either, as he's currently at the Frankfurt Book Fair. So everything's a bit different on the Molden podcast, Let's Book. But of course, I've brought a guest with me again today, a widely traveled citizen of the world. He's a historian and a successful journalist with The Economist and has served, among other roles, as a correspondent in Mexico and Central America, as well as in Africa and Southeast Asia. He has written books about Sudan and about Burma. He was a visiting professor of politics and history in London and Princeton, and he has just been awarded the Kreisky Prize for the best political book of 2024 for his Stadt der Ideen, als Wien die moderne Welt erfand. Beyond that, he is an exceptionally friendly, curious, and immensely intelligent contemporary. A warm welcome to you, Richard Cockett.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I'm sure I can't live up to even half of that, but we'll have a go.
I'm very sure you will. Richard, welcome back to Vienna. You're in town fairly often, aren't you?
Yes, I seem to spend an increasing amount of time in Vienna. I do quite a lot of talks here now, which is nice. And on this occasion, I'm here to pick up the Bruno Kreisky Prize, which you just mentioned. And I'm giving a couple of other talks while I'm here too.
When you come to Vienna, where do you head first? Do you have a Viennese place of pilgrimage you always have to visit?
I guess I set my compass usually for the Herrengasse and that sort of area. And I kind of, it's probably the cafes. I have my 6 favourite cafes.
Oh, which one is your favourite?
So I work my way around the cafes. So the most essential thing on any trip to Vienna is I feel probably that I've done my 6 cafes in my week or my few days.
Which one would be the first you're trying to?
The one I like, the best one, I think, is the Café Prukel, which is opposite. We call it the Victoria and Albert Museum, but it's not. It's the Art and Design Museum.
That's quite right.
And I guess the next one, Café Museum.
Yeah, which is a very lovely one at the Karlsplatz.
At the Karlsplatz, exactly. And the Café Dinglas, which is further down the Herrengasse.
Yes.
Towards what I call the Credit Anstalt Bank. That's when it collapsed in 1931.
Yes.
So that's probably third on the list. I prefer that one to the one which is actually in the centre. Mm-hmm. And then I do like I would go to the Café Museum, but the Café Central, but of course it's impossible to get into anymore, unless you're an Instagram star. But remember, I do love the one opposite, the entrance to the university on the Ringstrasse, the Freud's old one, the Café.
Landmann?
Exactly, Landmann,
okay.
Which is sort of cushy and luxurious. But, who doesn't like a bit of cushy and luxurious?
That is very true.
So I think they're the kind of, they're the standouts.
Richard, we usually know Vienna as the capital city of music. Now then, Vienna as the city of ideas. What made Vienna at the start of the 20th century so different from other cities that so many ideas could take root here?
Many answers to that. I'll keep it short. Read the book.
Yes, we highly recommend the book.
So the thesis of the book is that there were 2 periods in Vienna's modern history that made it such a sort of a cauldron of new ideas. There's the fin de siècle period, which you mentioned. That's about 1870 to 1914. It's a liberal heyday. And then Red Vienna, the era of the Socialist City Council from 1919, the end of the First World War, up to 1934. And the thesis of the book is that you have to see these two periods together to get a full appreciation of the depth and the incredible range of Vienna's creativity during this era. So producing so many kind of brilliant people, but across a sort of enormous breadth of subjects. And I guess why people have responded to the book, I mean, is that people both in Vienna and mainly outside are very familiar with the Vienna of the fin de siècle, of Klimt and Mahler and Schiller and Freud and all those people from the pre-First World War era, in architecture, Otto Wagner, Adolf Loos, all these people and the writers, Schnitzer, etc. But I wanted to draw attention to the fact that it was also a city of science, so it was the leading scientific and importantly medical centre in Europe at this point. And then after the First World War, another younger generation came along, Karl Popper, Wittgenstein, the economists, F.A. Hayek, sociologists, Paul Lazarsfeld, and Ernst Dichter, Hertha Herzog, a whole range of the younger generation who then took all these ideas to Britain and America. So it was a sort of gradual build-up of ideas, and then the emigration of many of those people, the forced exile after the takeover by Austro-fascism in 1934, and then the Anschluss in 1938, forced a lot of these people abroad, and they took all these ideas and the creativity with them.
You just mentioned Gustav Klimt, and we do ask our guests to bring a special item, a very personal item to the podcast, and you brought something that is kind of Klimt themes.
Yeah,
Would you like to tell us what you brought with us today?
So I bought a glasses case, and it's got a Klimt portrait on the front, a little advertising blurb now for the Arts and Design Museum. You can get it from their shop. In fact, I have 3 of them.
Okay,
for all
themed.
my glasses, all Klimt themed, which is beautiful. And I do use Klimt a lot in my lectures and talks I give about Vienna, because he illustrates perfectly the symbiotic relationship in Vienna between arts and science, and Klimt's particular case, arts and medicine. And this is still a very new field of study of demystifying Klimt's portraiture, because a lot of the apparently random symbols that he used on the cloaks of his figures, for instance, in the kiss, so he flattens the portraiture and so the eye is drawn as much to the background and the sort of gowns that they seem to be wearing as much as the kiss. And on those gowns, beneath the kiss, are lots of representations and symbols, and in fact they are anatomical drawings from the era, from the turn of the century, when people were first drawing or attempting to analyze the components of male sperm and ovaries of women and ovoids, etc. So people have now traced the drawings of the time onto the Klimt portrait. So he's kind of important for what I do, my representation of Vienna as this sort of magical combination of arts and sciences.
And so everywhere you go in taking out your glasses, you always be reminded of Vienna.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's fascinating is that Vienna sets standards in so many fields. Back in the days, modern management, like Peter Drucker, empirical social research, like you mentioned, Paul Lazarsfeld and Marie Jahoda, the fitted kitchen, for example, Margarete Schütte-Lihotzky, and even the shopping mall with Victor Grün, all hail from here, not to mention psychoanalysis. And there seemed to be much a great influence between all fields. Was it something unique, and what role did the traditional Viennese coffee houses actually play in that?
Well, I think it is unique. I mean, this is why I'm drawn to Vienna and writing about Vienna, and other people have been, because I make the point of the book that it wasn't just the ideas that came out of the place, but it was the practical application of those ideas to what I call real life. That really made a difference. So you've just mentioned some of those people. Peter Drucker, he was the one who He was born in Vienna and brought up here, like so many of them in the 1920s, 30s interwar period. And he coined the phrase knowledge economy to describe this process of the new person, most in this great shift from the industrial age to the modern age of the knowledge economy, where the people who would decide the fate of nations were not the labourers anymore, earning money by the sweat of their brow. It was those knowledge workers, he called them, who would apply knowledge to everyday problems. And you mentioned some of them, Margaret Schutter-Lechowski applying the latest science of time and motion studies to domestic work, thus creating the modern fitted kitchen. Victor Gruen was an architect, studied shopping patterns, etc., and eventually came up with the shopping mall. And anyway, there are many, many more ideas. And that's what makes Vienna so interesting. It not only had the ideas, but it produced the people who applied those original ideas to everyday life around us. And the coffee house did play a important role, including some of my favorite coffee houses, which I've already mentioned, because they gave Vienna a sort of very generous and democratic environment during this time. So knowledge, the production of knowledge, was usually confined to universities during this period. This is 1870 to 1914. So it was very confined to a small elite. And, Vienna, it was still relatively confined to a small upper bourgeois elite. But you had the coffee house. So the coffee house was where everybody could go and did go. And all the great men and women of the era, they had their favorite coffee houses. And they would go there and declaim and talk about their ideas to a rapt audience. And so basically for a price of a melange, if any, you could sit and listen to one of these people bore on about the latest ideas.
Which,
so it was
which is kind of still a thing, because you can go to a coffee house and stay there forever just by ordering one coffee.
That's
and
right. And nowadays,
the whole day.
you get the paper out and you can stay there the whole day and resist the waiter's best attempts to shush you away.
Which they hardly do, because they don't do this in Vienna. They would in Germany, but
exactly.
they wouldn't do in Vienna.
They're very nice and polite in Vienna, and they accept that the coffee houses for different purposes in Vienna. But I haven't seen anyone yet declaim to an audience.
No, that is absolutely true. Although we do readings in coffee houses, but this is a very special occasion.
But generally, because in the old days, you had, as I say, all these people, Freud or Adolf Loos or philosophers, politicians, and they had their favourite cafes, and then that attracted fellow like-minded people, and then they would all sit around, discuss, and somebody would give a little talk, etc. So it was a way of, democratizing learning, knowledge, etc. And people, who didn't go to universities or didn't have access to universities, didn't go to lectures, they could go to coffee houses.
True.
And listen to all these people instead.
What about women? They were not allowed in many places back in the days, or hadn't had a chance for higher education. Was that a way of educating themselves?
Yes, I mean, there's a difference here. This is where the difference in time period is crucially important. So pre-1914, you're absolutely right, women were largely excluded from this culture. After 1919, and particularly the social democratic takeover of the city council, women were highly included in a lot of this. Yeah. And Vienna was prominent in producing a dazzling array of this literally the first generation of educated women, university-educated women who'd been allowed into the various institutions here, and they went on to have equal success in creating so many kind of new fields, coming up with new ideas in the 1920s and 1930s just as much as the men. And they had full access then to the cafes and other places and all the kind of intellectual institutes and learning in Vienna as for men. So that was a profound shift, and it became much more inclusive place, Vienna, with startling results. And again, I think this is part of as I argue in the book, this was very much another key to Vienna's intellectual fecundity, productivity, that it included half of a population very much in its life, whereas women remained excluded from a lot of cultural and intellectual production in other cities of the same time.
Do you have a favorite Viennese invention? A favorite idea from Vienna?
Ooh. Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, there were just so many. I mean, the most significant one, which is overlooked here, is usually the most significant idea is free market economics, the Austrian school. Hugely important in Britain and America. So I'm from Britain. I was brought up in the 1980s. And that's actually how I first discovered Vienna, or the importance of Vienna, because in those days, F.A. Hayek was Mrs. Thatcher's economics guru and lauded by the Reaganites in America. So I first discovered Vienna by asking, who is this chap, Hayek, and then tracing it all back to the Austrian school and all the debates here about economics in the 1920s and 1930s. But I think probably my favorite Viennese and the Viennese of applying theory and ideas of psychoanalysis and child-parent bonding, the theory of all that, to lots of other fields. The law very rarely took account of the interests of children at that time. She helped reform that. She was brilliant at helping to reform visiting hours of parents, the amount of time that parents were allowed to visit their children in hospitals in the 1940s and before 1950s. If children were ill in hospital, parents, amazingly, were barely allowed to see them. It was considered unimportant, irrelevant to their treatment that 3 or 4 year olds should see their parents. They were wholly in the care of these doctors who thought they knew best and who thought that visits from the parents would just disturb them. And Anna Freud, with very rigorous empirical research, proved this to be totally erroneous otherwise. And after quite a long, strenuous campaign, she reformed visiting hours in Britain. So now it's perfectly normal for parents to be with them, which was a great thing, which I thought was amazing progress. But I mean, it's looking back now, I didn't know any of this when I wrote the book, and it was just amazing to think that it had ever been the case that parents were not allowed to visit their children in hospital. How could a children possibly be happy and able to recover from some general illness without seeing their parents at that age? And Anna Freud made that possible. So I think it's probably, Anna Freud. And of course, I'm always Margareta Schüttler-Hosky with her The Fitted Kitchen, which you can see her own fitted kitchen here.
Yeah, in the Technischen Museum.
In Vienna, exactly.
No,
in her own flat.
Oh, true.
Is now open in the 5th District. It's got strange visiting hours, but I would urge anyone to go and see it. And there, because she came back towards the end of her life to Vienna. She was a lifelong communist and lived in Eastern Germany and came back to Vienna to build her, and she didn't have much money, so had a tiny flat, and so built this fitted kitchen in her own flat, which you can now see. She was a great hero too. I'd pick out those two, I think.
Okay, so you consider yourself to be an Anna Freudian.
I consider myself an Anna Freudian, yeah, definitely.
Okay. When we talk about inventions or inventors, are we also talking about cultural achievements, for instance, in popular culture that seem spreading around the world? One of the most famous westerns in modern film history was High Noon. That was made by the Austrian Fred Zinnemann. Funny thought, an Austrian immigrant shaped the most American of all movies.
Yes. Again, before I wrote the book, I had little idea that all these directors of the golden age of Hollywood, as it's called, so many of them were immigrants from Europe, direct immigrants from Europe. So many of them were Austrians. So Fred Zinnemann was one. The most famous of them was probably Billy Wilder.
Yes.
He wasn't born in Vienna, but he grew up in Vienna and learnt his trade in Vienna. as a journalist. He was a sort of crime journalist for a while,
Yes.
and then moved to Berlin and on to Hollywood. And he was the director, of course, of Some Like It Hot. And they brought a very different sensibility to Hollywood, and they were always struggling against the sort of puritanical censorship of Hollywood, which Billy Wilder broke comprehensively with Some Like It Hot.
Oh, yes.
From the
And the very, very famous dress of Marilyn Monroe.
Exactly, that's right, and the equally, but the more controversial dresses of Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis.
That is very true, yes.
With the, it's again astonishing to think nowadays when we have endless culture war, transgender and gay culture, etc. That this in mid 1950s America, everyone was laughing and enjoying this film, which is basically a film about cross-dressing. But Billy Wilder managed to do that.
And it stayed a classic until today.
And it stayed a classic till today. And very conservative people like my own father, he loved Some Like It Hot. But somehow all the sort of Billy Wilder managed to do it with so much humour and sort of love and tenderness that all the kind of deeper societal implications of this sort of just came with it and were not sort of emphasised, but were there nonetheless. So it's a clever bit of filmmaking. And Fred Zimmerman too, who did High Noon, another Austrian, as a metaphor, I think, for Austria's own fate during the 1930s, when it's like the poor sheriff in the movie. He's deserted by all the townsfolk that he's helped, so he has to face all the bandits on his own. And Fred Zimmerman saw this as a metaphor for Austria facing fascism in the 1930s, which is why he was drawn to the material.
Yes.
Again, the metaphor, it's a metaphor. You wouldn't get any of this from the film, but that's why he was drawn to the material.
There are also other quite different but very popular everyday things that everyone knows but few realize were invented in Vienna. For example, the emoji, if you say so. Will you tell us how that came about and what it might has to do with Otto Neurath's invention of the pictogram?
Okay. Yes, Otto Neurath. So the infogram, the emoji, all that has its origins in Vienna too, in 1920s Vienna. So Otto Neurath was he was a socialist, great guru to Red Vienna, of social democratic Vienna in the 1920s, 1930s, and he wanted to present information to the working class, the core of the social democratic support, many of whom were very uneducated, many of whom would have been illiterate at that time, so they couldn't read, and they couldn't read complex official reports on the housing crisis in Vienna. So he basically created, along with a few others, a pictorial representation of information. This is the origins of what we now call infographs or visual information, pictographics, emojis, etc., etc. So a way of giving people information in visual form. And it was incredibly successful. Very, very quickly, people all over the world realized how useful this would be. The original shows he had were in the ground floor of the town hall here in Vienna, where he set up what he called a museum, and it wasn't a museum at all. It was just an exhibition space where he would showcase what the Social Democrats were doing, what the town council were doing in this pictographic form. And his great breakthrough visually seems very mundane, but it was a brilliant breakthrough, was that previous to that, if people had done anything like this, if they wanted to show an increase in the size of something, for instance, size of population, they would have a small bubble. And then if the population grew, they would have a slightly bigger bubble. But Neurath argued this was inexact. So he would plot for increase in the size of a population. You'd have a representation of one sort of stick man which was, say, 10,000 people. It was clearly at 10,000 people. And then if a population grew, if it was 20,000, you'd have 2 stickmen. Easy.
Okay.
And then, so you have all these kind of wonderful diagrams of just sort of showing populations of USA v Germany, etc., measured in stickmen. So it was quite easy to see visually. You needed no other information. You know that USA had 3 times as many stickmen as Germany. Simple, and you could trace all modern infographics back to Otto Nora. And emojis, yes, similar. Yeah, he used graphic art to show again whether things were good or bad. So that was used a lot too, and also signage, road signs. That all dates back to there as well. Simple ways of conveying often complex information.
We do a questionnaire with every one of our authors, and now that's about speed answering.
Okay.
So are you ready to take the
I'm ready to take the challenge.
Podcast questionnaire? Okay, here we go. First question. Your favorite book as a child was?
I think the Asterix or the Tintin books.
Coffee house or solitary writing room?
Probably solitary writing room.
If time travel really worked, which year would you like to visit?
67. It would have been so nice to have been round when it was all happening in London. In the mid-1960s.
1967. Not 67
No, not
back in ancient
60,
Rome, but
no.
1967.
1967, yeah. If I'd been, 17, 18 of that would have been very exciting.
Is there a lost source you would have liked to find in your research and still secretly hope to discover?
That's a very good one. This is fairly detailed, but so one of the characters in this book, is called Johnny von Neumann, who was probably the greatest physicist, mathematician of the 20th century. And he was a Hungarian. He created the first electronic computer at Princeton. And there's a sort of mysterious missing 2 years. He came to Britain during the war. He was working for the Americans on the Manhattan Project and stuff. And he came to Britain for 2 years during the war, possibly to be with Alan Turing, the other great inventor of computer. The two of them are they're the lodestars of physics, computing, and mathematics of the 20th century. He spent a mysterious 1.5 years in Britain, possibly with Turing, at what was Bletchley Park, for decrypting all the German codes. And then don't seem to be any documents on this. We don't know what happened. So, many people are so intrigued by what these 2 guys might have got up to for 1.5 years. This was at the creation, the birth of the modern digital computing age. And they were both about to make these incredible scientific breakthroughs, etc. So what were they doing?
Okay.
Is there a recording? Is there any documents about this? That immediately occurs to me.
Do you dream about what you're writing?
No.
Never?
Never.
Okay. Here's the last question. You're allowed to read only one book for the rest of your life, over and over again. Which would it be?
I don't know. You floor me, because I normally think of this in terms of film, film or music. You see, so but books is a interesting one. I mean, I know my favourite book, and that's Lawrence Durrell's The Alexandria Quartet. So I regard that as the best book ever written. Maybe I would like to take that away and get more out of it, sort of reread it again. The problem is I don't want to reread books ever, because you enjoy a book in the moment, and the moment is a particular emotional, intellectual moment that makes that experience complete. So you can't go and reread a book.
Because you've already changed yourself.
And get the same enjoyment or pleasure out of it, because you yourself have already changed.
Yeah.
So, and possibly that book helped to change you. But that's in the past. So I can't.
Richard, thank you so much for being with me here today at the Malden Podcast. Again, City of Ideas, Stadt der Ideen, highly recommend reading it. Thank you so much, and congratulations again on the Kreisky Prize.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.